Cassie. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Kelly Roberson. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Alcohol Policy, and I'm pleased to be serving as the moderator for today's conversation. We're going to discuss a report that explores the functional specifications for record management systems, RMSs, as they relate to alcohol regulatory enforcement. I'm honored to have with me today Carrie Christophus, Executive Director of the National Liquor Law Enforcement Association, Maria Cardielos, Executive Director of the IJIS Institute, Melissa Weinsberg, Director of Programs, also at the IJIS Institute, and Kathy Torrey, Business Development Manager at Computronics. A few housekeeping items before we get started. We've allotted an hour and a half for this webinar, but it's likely we won't use all of the time we've set aside, so we might give you a couple more minutes back in your day. At the end of this. We will also hold time at the end of the conversation to answer any questions you might have, but in the meantime and throughout the course of the webinar, feel welcome to add any questions you have to the Q&A box. That would be preferable to the chat just so we can keep those organized and they don't get lost in the sauce. So that Q&A box is at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to them when we wrap up the discussion. And we'll also be adding some links in the chat to helpful reports referenced throughout the webinar and encourage you to review those. The report we're discussing today is already in the chat. Let's go ahead and get started. To set the stage and clarify what we mean by RMSs or record management systems, and so everyone can kind of see how they fit into this discussion, when we talk about RMS, we're referring broadly to systems used by law enforcement, licensing, and even revenue agencies to issue licenses, monitor compliance of licensees, and collect taxes and fees. So to get us started, Carrie, thank you and NLLEA for putting this webinar together. Can you give us a little bit of history about this project and how it came about?
Yes, Kelly, thank you. So this project actually began back in 2019. So we're going on about 6-7 years now. My daughter would have liked that 6-7 reference. Had to put a little humor in there. So it started as a collaboration between NLLEA and the National Alcohol Beverage Control Association. And as we started researching the needs of alcohol regulatory enforcement agencies. We later partnered with the IJIS Institute, and I know Maria and Melissa are here with us today. And IJIS is Integrated Justice Information Systems, just for all of you that might not know what that acronym is, and I do have to look it up all the time as well. And they're a great organization with extensive experience in law enforcement RMS standards. So the idea of this project really took shape when the enforcement division at the Mississippi Alcoholic Beverage Control, they were looking at the possibility of upgrading their RMS. They were seeking input from other states about their setups and needs, kind of a template to guide their RFP. Around that same time was the Tennessee Wine and Spirits Retailers Association versus Thomas case, which centered on whether a state's residency requirement for retail liquor license violated the U.S. Constitution's Commerce Clause. And that highlighted the importance then of having strong, reliable data to demonstrate how alcohol regulations serve a legitimate public health and safety rationale. So that case really put states on notice that data collection isn't just about record keeping, it's about being able to prove with evidence that alcohol laws are working to protect communities. That connection between data and public health rationale became a key driver then for this project.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that background. I really appreciate it. Maria, perhaps you can give us some more info about the IJIS Institute. The Institute was new to me prior to this webinar, and perhaps also for some folks on this webinar as well. So what's the Institute? What do y'all do?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kelly. And thank you, Carrie, for hosting this as well. A couple of things. First of all, the IJIS Institute is a 25-year-old private nonprofit group that was actually seeded by the Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Assistance many years ago. And the original intent had been to better the relationship between what were the justice practitioners, classic law enforcement, courts, corrections, etc., and the service providers or the vendors that supported them. And that was, at that time, it was the records management system, so that RMS acronym, or then the CAD providers, computer aided dispatch. And that was the source of our data, right? That was the Bible. And 25 years later, those are still our Bibles, but there's so many more applications and so many different ways of collecting data. And data is, in fact, sort of our reason for existence. Though we were constituted to better the relationship, over time we now refer to ourselves as a collaboration community. And what that means is that practitioners from the public sector, not just justice, which is why sometimes we don't mind if people don't know what the IJIS stands for, because it is really about public sector entire, is fundamentally about bringing those justice and public sector practitioners together with researchers, with statisticians, with industry reps, with policymakers in order to be at a single table. Our secret sauce is convening those disparate parties, understanding what their priorities are, and then ultimately meeting with them and developing a solution that is responsive to their needs. The pillars that we focus on is understanding the operational priorities, understanding the policies that in fact exist from a federal, state, local perspective, and then ultimately promulgating, supporting, and helping to develop what are the standards. And really that is where we then supported the development of liquor law enforcement and others, standards to achieve interoperability of different tools. We are not about a particular vendor or product. We are all about ensuring that the data is being efficiently and effectively shared across agencies, across states, up and down the Fed lines, et cetera. And what we did and what we really will focus on a little bit later during this meeting is to explain to you the process that we went through in order to update what was an RMS standard or specification, without getting into too much detail, that then was reflective of your community's needs. Then address what were the data elements that was important in order to meet your priorities. So to that end, though we service what is public safety, justice, homeland security, school safety issues, opioid substance use disorder issues. Though the gamut is very expansive of what we can serve, our focus on understanding the priority, understanding the policies, and ensuring an efficient and effective data transfer is what we live for.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for that background. It's helpful to know more. So would you prefer IJIS or IJIS?
And I think everyone prefers IJIS, but thank you.
Okay. Got it. And Cassie, tell me a little bit more about the role that Computronics played in developing these functional specs. Why is vendor input so important here?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly, and thank you, NLEA and IJIS for having us. So can I just say we have 65 participants on this webinar. I think it's a reflection of just what a need, this topic is. It can be a bit in the weeds, but if you are going out to RFP, this is going to be a really helpful tool. And I think that's really reflected in what we're seeing in the attendance. So thank you for joining us, everybody. So we were just delighted to see that IJIS and NLEA and NABCA that funded this initiative really approached it in a collaborative way and wanted to engage service providers like Computronics that has a software solution, POSSE ABC, for alcohol beverage control agencies. It's truly a practical approach to thinking about these specifications because vendors see firsthand how these RFPs and specifications play out in the real world. We're reading these RFPs all the time when they come out. So Computronics, just for folks who may not know who we are, we have a software solution, POSSE ABC, that it's an enterprise software solution for licensing, enforcement, case management, certification, education of servers, as well as reporting, regulatory reporting, and brand registration. So it really is a comprehensive suite for what alcohol beverage regulatory agencies, have to do on a day-to-day basis. We have 12 North American clients, 10 of which are U.S. states, and 3 of which are control jurisdictions, Maine, Pennsylvania, and Oregon, as an example. So, this experience gives us, with all of those different clients doing alcohol beverage regulation, it gives really just a valuable insight into making sure that these specifications that have been identified are realistic, that they can actually be implemented, and that they also align with standards for data security and accessibility, which are key components that states and jurisdictions have to consider when they're looking at a software solution. So we were absolutely delighted, to participate in this opportunity with these folks and provide our input. and see that the specifications align with our product really closely, and that it's out of box functionality that we have from secure data management, audit ready workflows, and that they're public facing, it's publicly accessible, and meets the WCAG compliance requirements. So what this allows you to see, though, is that there's opportunity to quickly, these are proven and validated specifications, not only from an IJIS perspective, but from a vendor perspective. And then, of course, NLEA brings that sort of business user perspective. So really kind of a seal of approval kind of from all the different folks. And so, yeah, that our product aligns really nicely with these specifications was sort of icing on the cake.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks for all of that background from all of you. Really appreciate that to help set the stage. And Carrie and Cassie too, I know this is a conversation we've had before and certainly speaks to this as an important issue, kind of what good is a law if you're not enforcing it? And even if you are enforcing it, what sort of data are you collecting? How is that stored in a way that's actionable, impactful, and gives a clear picture? So Carrie, from your perspective, what would you describe as some of the most important elements from this project as they relate to alcohol regulatory enforcement?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. So, as the alcohol marketplace continues to evolve, enforcement agencies are facing new and complex challenges. There's a growing need for efficiency, transparency, and consistency in how we collect and manage the data. Developing these reporting standards for RMS, we found to be critical. It ensures that alcohol regulatory enforcement agencies have a systematic and comprehensive way to collect, analyze, and use this enforcement data. As we all know, during COVID-19 pandemic, we saw a surge in alcohol license types, new permissions for alcohol to go. Some of those, are still in place, increased e-commerce activity, alcohol being sold and consumed in places we hadn't even seen before, like in parks and parking lots, even across state lines through online sales. So meanwhile, alcohol resources didn't grow to match that expansion. Agencies are still trying to catch up with that. We're being asked to do more with less, which really underscored the need for this standardized systems that could support the work more efficiently.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I know NLLEA partnered with NABCA on this project, and I also want to highlight a few other reports that speak to that, doing more with less challenge. So first, NABCA partnered with Maine and Bablo and Maine to produce a report on compliance and capacity. I'm going to put a link to that here in the chat. And one of the findings of that report was that reliance on paper systems really limits regulatory capacity. And another report I want to highlight, albeit a bit selfishly, is one from the center itself, and we call it kind of the deregulation by defunding report. But essentially, what this 20-year retrospective report observed is that funding in the actual human resources for alcohol regulatory enforcement, like you said, haven't kept pace with the growth of the industry over the years. So adding aging systems that rely on dated technology on top of overtasking and kind of underfunding is a bad combo. You're going to have a bad time, as they would say. So, but back to this report, as your team started putting together the initial research, what were some of your preliminary findings here?
So thanks, Kelly. Yeah, and thank you for highlighting those reports. I think they're both two very important reports that I know we've referenced for other projects, and we encourage our membership to use those reports as well. But one of the first things we had discovered was just how little literature existed on this specific topic. When we conducted our literature review, we found plenty of standards for general law enforcement RMS, but nothing tailored specifically to alcohol regulatory enforcement. And that's actually what led us to the IJIS Institute. As Maria has mentioned, they've been a thought leader in bridging communication between public sector enforcement and private sector RMS vendors. And we then assembled an advisory committee and created a national survey to better understand the needs and capacities of ARE agencies. So The results revealed wide variability across the country, not just in resources, but in how responsibilities are divided. Some agencies handle licensing, enforcement, and adjudication under one roof, while others have those functions spread across multiple departments. So identifying the diverse typologies of states really helped shape our understanding of the data landscape.
Great. And Melissa, let's bring you into the conversation. Melissa, you and the IJIS Institute obviously worked very closely with NLLEA and NABCA to develop these specs, these specifications. Tell me a little bit more about the project. Why was this important? What was the world of alcohol regulatory enforcement and alcohol law enforcement new to IJIS? I know you've been active in a lot of other traditional law enforcement areas, as Maria highlighted at the top, but tell us some more here.
Thanks, Kelly. I think IJIS has had some background in this topic. Also, as a former state employee, I worked with our alcohol regulatory group in Ohio. It's interesting because when we were first contacted by Carrie and Cassie at the time, because she worked for NAPCA at that time, about this project. We had just finished a major project related to records management system functional specifications for law enforcement. We had just completed updating a report that had been outdated for about 15 years. And completed that process. So using that same methodology, we were able to very easily carry that over to this particular project and found some excellent synergies between the two projects. The functional specifications themselves are extremely necessary because they lay the groundwork for alcohol licensing and enforcement agencies by describing the key functions that should be included in a solution in any system that an alcohol regulatory agency uses. When we drafted the report, the input from the steering committee, both the steering committee and the policy working groups, was extremely instrumental to our success of the report. We were able to gather input from multiple stakeholders to ensure that we ended with a quality product. The report itself covers 7 key functional areas, ranging from the new applicant license process to license revocation. Other areas included license renewals, transfers, special event permits, complaint processing, and case processing. For each of the functional areas, they were broken down. The report is broken down consistently for each area. We focused on a use case, as well as identifying the key stakeholders for each of the processes. And when I talk about key stakeholders, that could be anyone from the state licensing authority to an applicant, local governing authorities that are required to receive notification about a new application, as well as law enforcement or tax or revenue departments too. In addition to the key stakeholders, each section of the report also identifies the information that should be collected for that particular function, along with a workflow and the key functions, integrations, and outputs for each of the tasks.
Great. Great, thank you. And speaking of your advisory committee in the report, I mean, that's quite the lineup. I saw that list, that roster, when I was looking at the report before we got together. Quite a few heavy hitters and decades of experience there. Well done. I want to talk a little bit more about the survey. What were the main goals, Carrie? What did you find?
So our main goal was to understand how agencies collect and manage their data. One key question we asked was, when conducting operations in the field, how are data or information currently collected? So nearly half, about 49%, reported using smartphone, tablet, or laptop to collect the data, while a third, about 33%, still relied exclusively on paper forms. And that was a surprising statistic for us. We also found that agencies with separate RMS for licensing and enforcement often struggle to share and transfer data across systems. Several respondents said they wished all that information lived in one integrated RMS. Don't we all? And some reported that they are actively working towards that goal. So those findings then directly inform the second phase of this project, which is developing the functional specifications.
Gotcha. I was surprised by that 1/3 of agencies collecting exclusively on paper. That was stunning to me. I thought is Michael Scott in the office and they're lobbying paper only. Dunder Mifflin is making a lot of money off of those areas, I guess. Was there anything else that you were kind of pleasantly or not so pleasantly surprised by in that process and kind of that fact-finding mission?
Yeah, I think we were surprised too to learn that there was no predominant RMS vendor or program used across the country for alcohol regulatory enforcement agencies. I think which also speaks to the vast differences among states and how they collect and report their data.
Yeah. All right, so you have the how they're collecting and you understand the why of its importance. I guess the next step is what. So developing those functional specifications, what did that process look like?
Yeah, so once we had the survey data, we formed a working group of subject matter experts, or our SMEs. I learned what a SME was. Um, and, so those SMEs represented people in enforcement, licensing, and public health. We had several meetings. So together we created use cases, process maps to model how agencies actually conduct operations from license applications to enforcement actions. We identified the core functions that any alcohol regulatory RMS should perform, whether it be for licensing, enforcement, or adjudication. And then ultimately, our goal was to create standards that improve data quality, interoperability, efficiency, and cost effectiveness. These specifications give states blueprints that they can use when procuring or upgrading their RMS systems, helping ensure that systems meet the real world needs of alcohol regulatory enforcement. And I just wanted to add, we did have a lot of fun working with the SMEs and the many work groups that we had to, define those use cases. And, I remember one afternoon working and just, what's the definition of food came up across licensing. And if you work in the alcohol regulatory enforcement world, you would have got that conversation. But we were grateful to work with such a knowledgeable group. And I want to give kudos to NABCA, to Kadar Donge, who helped us map out all those use cases as well.
That's awesome and funny to learn a new definition of SME, right? Not just Captain Hook's right-hand man.
Yes.
Great, Melissa. This truly does appear to be an excellent resource for both liquor law enforcement agencies and vendors. And how foresee them or see them using this document?
So I think Carrie touched on some of this. Keep in mind that when you think about the procurement process for any government agency, the initial process of developing an RFP itself can take anywhere from 18 to 24 months. That doesn't include the response from a vendor to contracts and so forth before an agency can actually get started on a project. I think where this document is important for agencies is it can help them jumpstart that process of developing an RFP because it does provide a solid baseline of requirements that can be a starting point for agencies. Any agency that is in the process of assessing, upgrading, or replacing the records management solution should use this document as a reference tool. One of the things, though, that is important to keep in mind is that this document should be viewed as a common denominator because every state may function a little bit differently. So as states are using this, they will find that they may need to alter some of the workflows a little bit and alter some of the steps in the process to meet their specific needs. But again, at least it provides that baseline to get started with versus starting from scratch in the process. And from a vendor perspective, I think this document is extremely important as well, because if you're a vendor who's new to alcohol regulatory enforcement and you want to develop a system, this is a great starting point for you too, as a vendor, to understand the process, to understand the workflows, and at least get that baseline information you need to start the process. When we developed the RMS specifications for law enforcement, one of the interesting things that we had not thought about at the time in terms of uses for the document was for state agencies from a training perspective. So if you have a new staff person coming into your agency, this is an excellent document to use as a training tool, just to give those new staff an overview of what a regulatory system includes and what they would see as the particular functions of that system.
That's great. I love the ability to use this document as a resource for training and for system development and just overall understanding of like, what do these agencies do? What should an RMS do? What are just the baselines here, right? This seems like such a great resource for so many different sectors and stakeholder groups. In addition to the workflows and the report contents mentioned above, are there other areas where this might be of interest to other users?
When we drafted the report, we added a couple of additional sections in addition to the functional areas that focused on some of the key things that organizations should consider when developing an RMS system and when they go out for procurement for a new system. And some of those are key functional areas that have to be addressed with any system. We discussed the importance of deploying a solution that allows for access in the fields. In the field, it's important for inspectors to be able to perform their jobs efficiently, and having to go back to a desk in an office to do reports, that just is not an efficient way for someone to do their work. One of the key things, though, you have to keep in mind when you're allowing for access in the field is you do have to consider that internet connectivity may not always be available. So it's important to ensure that a solution allows for offline work so that the data can be later uploaded to the central system if necessary. In addition, the inspector should have the ability to print reports, to print citations in the field, and to make their process at the inspection site as easy as possible versus having to go back to a site an additional time to deliver documents and paperwork. But another key area that we focused on in the report is security. As agencies develop an RMS, they really should understand what's required from a security perspective and make sure that they have the appropriate privacy controls in place. Solutions need to comply with both state and federal privacy laws and regulations, given that background check information is a central part of the solution, because new applicants are required to conduct background checks. The results are uploaded to the solution so that data is available. It's very important that these solutions apply with the FBI CJIS security policy. And additionally, the Data Privacy and Protection Act and payment card industry standards are key standards that should be considered as part of any RMS solution. Note that the FBI recently published a new CJIS security policy, version 6.0. That policy itself is about 400 pages, so it really does require folks who understand security and are able to go through that document and make sure that the requirements are being met. The final thing that I would mention or just highlight that we focused on is the importance of reusing data. Data should be entered once, and it should be able to transfer to other areas of the application as it's necessary. It increases data quality. It saves time for the users. Finally, I would mention that any solution that is procured should be based on open standards to ensure interoperability and allow for cost effectiveness.
Great. 400 pages for that 6.0 policy. Melissa, I'm trying to get people to read a book that's less than 200 pages called Toward Liquor Control. If I give them the option between those two, I think I'm going to have a spike in my readership. So thank you. I'll take 160 over 400, but I'm glad we have experts who certainly can dig into the weeds there. Cassie, I read somewhere that a lot of government IT projects are prone to not success, prone to failure. I wanted to ask you, because Computronics has worked with so many ABC agencies, what have you learned about why some of these projects struggle to be successful?
Yeah, it's true. It's kind of startling when you really read and sink your teeth into the research. And I would point people to Standfish Group's Chaos Report and Gartner. Both really have spent decades studying this issue for, what makes technology projects succeed or fail in government. And their findings do show that about 30% of public sector projects finish on time, on budget, and achieve their goals. 30%. It's pretty shocking. And some of the things they reference, the top success factors, are pretty consistent across these two different firms. First, having executive sponsorship, that your agency director and whoever does your IT work, that they're in alignment and that they stay engaged in the project throughout its lifespan. Also, they identified active user involvement. So systems that were built with users, not for them. So they're engaged in the process every step of the way because they have to use the product in the end. So it helps with change management by engaging users early in the process. And then the other kind of top success they identified was procurement alignment. Understanding your jurisdiction's rules early can help you avoid having to do any rework later on after the fact, which can be pretty frustrating for everybody involved. So that's just a starting point. They also identified clear requirements, realistic planning. So if you have 900 requirements and you think that you can go live in 9 months, that's probably not very realistic. And so being just really understanding what is realistic planning when you think about the number of requirements that you have, and that you identify success up front. We did a webinar, Kelly and I did, with the Nebraska Liquor Control Commission, and they were really clear about what was going to be success for them in their project. And we were just, that helps make sure that you can execute the project better if you know what you're trying to achieve. So perhaps you're trying to move off paper completely. Like, that's a great defined success. That you have stable and capable project teams. And Melissa mentioned, that these, just writing the RFP can take 18 to 24 months. Then you have to do an evaluation of the vendors. Then you have to go through an implementation project. And then, or even before you get there, you have to do contract negotiation. So this can be a many years process from start to finish. So identifying who's going to be your project team and trying to keep that continuity throughout, honestly, from the vendor side as well, can be really helpful to determining a successful project. Change management, I mentioned that by engaging users early and throughout the process, that's going to help with your change management, but also governance. Who is making decisions? How are they making decisions? And when are you making decisions? Because throughout the implementation cycle, you're going to have to make decisions. And being able to make those quickly can help make sure that project continues to move on pace, and hopefully on time, on budget. And then scope control. You really want to make sure that you've defined your scope and that you're not in the end doing a lot of change requests, because that can be a bit of a sort of creep in the scope, and that's just going to add more time and ultimately a lot of times more budget. And then managing the risks. There are always risks to these projects. That's why so many of them fail. There's many, many risks that have to be managed, and a good vendor is going to help you manage those risks throughout the process. So let's just say you have an IT department that's not really in alignment with what you're trying to achieve. And I know that was maybe they're not in alignment, but maybe they're not helping you much. I know that was Nebraska's case. That was a constant conversation in the implementation of that project to make sure that that was being managed properly, so that it didn't ultimately undermine the project. So those are just some high level areas to keep in mind. But ultimately, you know, what we have found in our experience is that it's organizational and human factors actually that outweigh the technical ones almost every time that either, you know, make or break an implementation project. So just hopefully you got some little nuggets to take along the way based on this list from the research.
Yeah, it sounds like a very classic example of fail to plan and plan to fail kind of conversation. Asking for a friend, do Gartner and Standish have a report about how to stick to New Year's resolutions? 30% on time, on budget, and achieving goals is like objectively not great, but compared to roughly 8% of resolutions being kept past January, honestly, not that bad. But I do like these strategies for improving on the 30%. Plenty of room for growth there. Melissa, talk to me more about standards. I am pretentious. I would say I have very high standards with regards to coffee. I don't drink Folgers, absolutely not. Get Bustelo out of my face. And I've definitely been known to bring a rather over-the-top coffee setup on the road for conferences, of which I attend many. But you mentioned standards a few times. Everybody has mentioned standards. What kind of standards are we talking about here? Because I guarantee it's not sourcing single origin coffee beans. And why are these standards so important?
Thanks, Kelly. So I don't drink coffee, so certainly not standards related to coffee beans. I'm sure Maria will love to weigh in here as well, because standards are something that are very near and dear to the IJIS mission. But great question. When you think about standards, when we focus on standards, we're focusing on standards that determine how data is structured, collected, validated, and shared to ensure consistency and reliability and comparability across organizations, systems, and jurisdictions. They provide an opportunity for consistency with the goal of allowing for increased interoperability so that we can categorize and collect data consistently across multiple organizations. It makes it easier to share information between systems and ensure that we're using a common language as we work with other organizations. Building an RMS on a common standards helps to facilitate data sharing and integration. And more importantly as well, it helps to ensure interfaces are easier to create and develop across systems. One of the things that you'll often hear when talking to people about IT projects is that one of the common failure points is the development of interfaces. And the reason that occurs is because standards often don't exist that help facilitate the building of those interfaces. So, I mean, in summary, standards really can allow for greater efficiency and reduce the need for customizations when you're working on solutions and systems. They will also allow for greater transparency and accountability across organizations. When everyone's collecting data the same way, you can more consistently track alcohol-related statistics, making it easier to identify trends. They also enable scalability, making it easier to expand or adapt systems as needs change.
Great. Maria, anything to add on that front?
I think Melissa gave a great classic definition of standards, but the only thing that I'll add is this. Imagine the colloquial reference to the fact that the world becomes much smaller. 10 or 20 years ago, when technology was not so inundating for every single one of us, the notion of the internet and Googling something or researching something, or even the references to AI, was not a concept that was frequent and so pervasive in our daily lives. In achieving standards within an agency for liquor law enforcement is successful and has value when you're talking about sharing within different units, whether you're talking about the collection, the enforcement component, the analysis. Think how much value it has when you're talking about your neighboring jurisdiction. Think about the effect on the communities and how there are increases in certain criminal activities or abuses of certain ordinances, or then safety issues when you're talking about certain bars then serving beyond the hours that they're supposed to, and then there's accidents. Think about that on the regional level and then on the national level. Always remember that the goal of interoperability is about data sharing, but not in the old-fashioned, here's my report, now read it, now synthesize it, now be able to do something with it, but truly being able to do that in real time and having it affect and be absorbed from a true understanding of the value of the data and the impact to then somebody else's mission priorities. And the mission priorities could be at that agency level or to that national level, which happens instantaneously in our world. So interoperability is the best way to achieve that.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. That was going to answer the next question I was about to ask. So thank you. Thank you for getting into that. I appreciate it. And essentially, if your data isn't clean and consistent, or as we've mentioned, standardized, then there's really not much insight you can derive, and it just creates a bigger headache and takes more time and resources, which we know are already quite limited to resolve. I mean, we don't usually see with alcohol policy, right? We don't usually see standards set on a national scale, because if we'll recall with the 21st Amendment, this gives states the authority to regulate alcohol how they best see fit. So a top-down mandate, kind of like what we had with prohibition, without local flexibility, that's one of the reasons prohibition failed, right? But if there could be some real value for license counts or non-compliance rates being shared at that high level to provide national stats that reflect what's happening in states, what's happening on the ground. I know people at SAMHSA, NIAAA, CDC, and other researchers would love to see some of that data more readily available, and I'm sure many others, different stakeholder groups as well. So kudos to you at NLLEA, at IJIS, and NADCA as well. Really, really amazed that you had a lot of these folks, including public health, on your advisory board. That's a huge, because they're such an important partner and have a great perspective in that work. Shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk about RFPs. Cassie, what are some tips you would share for agencies as they're preparing to use these new functional specifications? What do you have for them?
Yeah, so as Melissa said, this is a baseline. It is certainly not going to be all encompassing. It mostly focuses on licensing and enforcement, but it's a great launching pad. So you're not just staring at a blank screen, or you're not looking at an old RFP that you worked on 15, 20 years ago that, technology has moved so far beyond. So it's a great place to start. But a couple other things that we work closely with agencies, as I've referenced already, and we've published several tips and tricks that are available on our website. So happy to, computronics.com. Check us out, looking for these tips and tricks, but a couple of them just quickly I'll run through. So you want to focus on outcomes, not checklists. Like, instead of listing 300 technical features, just describe your goal. Like, your goal is to reduce license turnaround times. Okay, that is a great goal. Or you want to enable mobile field inspections. This really helps describe what you need, but not how to get there. It allows a vendor to have flexibility, be creative in offering an efficient solution for your ultimate goal there. Being transparent about your challenges. I once worked with a regulatory authority director, and he said, I don't want to air my dirty laundry. It's okay to share the challenges that you're facing. It really will help provide context for vendors to know what to focus on. It'll make stronger proposals in the end. So it'll make your proposals that you receive more relevant. So highlighting some pain points you're having is perfectly reasonable, and the reasonable expectation we would see that in an RFP. Another thing is prioritizing requirements, labeling mandatory requirements, and then the desirable or nice to have is really helpful because it helps us focus on what matters, what you need the most, and avoiding sort of this all or nothing scoring, which can really limit innovation. Also including users in IT. You're going to hear this as a theme over and over and over again, because it really does help with change management. And the best technology solution in the world is definitely could still hit roadblocks if you have users who do not want to use the product in the end. They are just unwilling to move to the new system. So just keep that in mind. Business and IT need to sort of co-own the procurement process. I ran into on a different product that we sell, but I ran into a jurisdiction where IT put out an RFI, request for information, something you do kind of before you do an RFP often, to say kind of what's going on in the marketplace. And talked with a business user high up in the agency, didn't know anything that there was an RFI out. IT was not speaking to business. Business had no idea. How do you know the requirements listed are going to meet the needs of the business? So including users and that co-ownership between business and IT, absolutely critical to make sure you can have a smooth process in developing the RFP through implementation. And it also helps to make sure that you're hitting all those requirements from a technical, like security standpoint. IT is going to know those things. And it really creates more balanced, realistic, and kind of ensures that this is going to be implementable in the end. And then finally, and perhaps these are not in priority order, but engaging procurement early. Even though sometimes folks can say, oh, this procurement process can be painful, it's going to be more painful if you have to rework it in the end. So engaging them early, whether you can use NASPO ValuePoint, which we are a reseller under in many states, or a state-specific vehicle that you may have opportunity where you don't have to go out to RFP. You need to explore those opportunities, and only procurement will really be able to dictate what your jurisdiction will allow or not allow. So you just want to avoid those painful rework after the fact, and knowing the rules of engagement with your procurement offices. I cannot underscore it enough. So, if you have all those kind of principles alongside these specifications, you end up with a clearer RFP. It's going to be faster to evaluate what you get from vendors, and you're likely to attract higher quality proposals as a result of that.
Yeah, that the idea of transparency about current challenges makes me think of somebody who goes to therapy and sits down and says, well, I don't know, you guess what my problems are, and we'll see if we can solve them. Like that's, I am seeing 30%. This makes more sense. That's great. Thanks for these tips, Cassie. Melissa, anything to add on this front?
Just a couple of things. I want to pick up on a couple of things that Cassie mentioned. And first and foremost, I think one of the key things to remember is once you select a provider, you have to enter that process as a partnership and consider that the service provider or vendor your partner. If you don't do that from the start, it is going to be harder to succeed. I mean, keep in mind that that vendor is there to help you succeed as well, because they don't succeed if you don't have a successful project. So very important to ensure that the communication is constant, identify issues early, and work together to resolve them as quickly as possible. From an agency perspective, I think Cassie hit on this a little bit earlier. It is important to ensure that you have a good solid governance structure in place for implementation of a new project. You may need to consider legal, policy, and technical issues as you go throughout this project. So definitely want to make sure you have the right people in place. You want to make sure that you have a strong project manager who has some level of understanding of the subject matter as well, and ensure that documentation is solid throughout the project. The worst thing that can happen for an agency is for a project manager to leave and the appropriate documentation not be in place for someone to pick up and be able to continue to implement the project successfully. Not only the project manager, if you have a key stakeholder leave, it's important that you have the proper information and documentation ready so that you can bring the new stakeholder up to speed and be able to continue moving on the project. You don't want to put yourself in a position that you end up with several months of delay because you're bringing a new person up to speed and educating them on what you originally intended to do. And I would also add that Cassie, you mentioned this, bringing these stakeholders and all users in early is so important. I recently worked on a project related to an RMS implementation for one of our clients, and there was a particular unit, their records unit, in fact, that they left out of the project, and it has now caused delays because there was information that that group could have brought to the process that would have helped them be more successful. So it ended up creating about a 6-month delay for them from an implementation perspective by not bringing the right people within the organization to the table.
Wow. I'm learning so many things. I don't have any RFPs or RFIs. Center doesn't play in this world, but I have cringed so many times and hoping so many people on this webinar can avoid these pitfalls. And yeah, change management in 6 easy steps from Melissa. Thank you. I think now everybody's got them on their merry way. Thanks so much for that. Carrie, I want to turn back to you for a moment. This project clearly fills a critical gap in supporting that effective and data-driven alcohol regulation. Is there anything you want to add about what's next for this initiative?
Yeah, so our hope is that these functional specifications will be a living resource that states can adapt and build on. I mean, ultimately, I remember all throughout this project, Maria was always asking us, what's your wish list? What would you love to have? And, just seeing alcohol being recognized more at that national level. I mean, we know that alcohol is a contributing factor to so many violations. So seeing that more on a national level, I guess our wish list would be national dashboards that could be created across states. When we're looking at these data subsets. I know, working with public health on this was very instrumental too, and seeing it from their perspective and what kind of data they want from us. So I guess, just going forward, we just really want to see agencies using this document. And then, ultimately, I know the goal is like getting from specifications to standards. And what's that truly going to take?
Great. Thanks for your insights, and also for NLLEA for taking on this really important initiative. And thanks to the rest of the panel for their insights and expertise. Before I get to questions from our audience, I kind of want to take a point of privilege as your moderator and go back to something Cassie touched on, because I think we can have all this data collected in a standardized fashion that can, in an ideal world, where there's financial resources to also procure a new system or upgrade an existing one. But as we learned, that unfortunate 30% come out on time, on budget, and doing what everybody dreamed they would do. But Cassie, when implementing or upgrading that RMS, what indicators or outcomes do you consider defining project success beyond that on time and on budget? I know we talked a little bit about this, but maybe digging a little bit deeper into there. How can we find that success? Because I think so many folks will have that challenge. Of course, anyone who's upgrading or finding a new platform will have that challenge.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. And I just want to say, thank you, Melissa, for bringing up how important it is to look at the vendor like a partner once you've identified that vendor, because they are going to help you cross that finish line. So I just want to underscore what you said there, because it really resonated with, my own experience as a vendor. So I guess, my biggest piece of advice is really don't rush the foundation of getting the organization kind of aligned before you look at the technology and making sure that's aligned. Because as I said, it's the human element that often will kind of make or break this experience. That means you have executive sponsorship, aligned, ready, business IT. They're ready to go. They know how they're going to make decisions to move the project forward. You're going to engage those users early. We've mentioned that, 5 times or so on this webinar. So hopefully that's a big takeaway for everyone. And that you ensure procurement, you fully understand how you're going to purchase, because procurement will dictate how you can do that. So building in that governance, as I mentioned, about making those decisions quickly, how often. These are really often the invisible levers that keep projects healthy. So they're not to be ignored. They are really important to lay the groundwork that these specifications then can be a powerful blueprint to build, your modernization effort. And will, if you do those 2 things, should set you up for success. At Computronics, we're really proud that we do explore these areas with our clients, but also any prospects, anybody who's interested in pursuing a new system. Happy to have these conversations. We will be presenting at NLLEA's conference coming up in Fort Worth, Texas. So very excited to be presenting. I will not be. My colleague, Joshua Collier, will be there. We'll be presenting with the Nebraska Liquor Control Commission and the Nebraska State Patrol. So it'll be a great kind of example of what we talked about already, of how these different agencies are in different departments, but yet have to have the interoperability to work efficiently together. They're a great use case for how we've been able to achieve that. So hopefully we'll see you guys in Texas and come to that session.
Great, thank you. Melissa, I know you mentioned compliance with CJIS, PCI, and state privacy laws. I just have a couple more questions before we wrap up and open up to others. What challenges do you see agencies facing in balancing both accessibility and security with their RMS solutions?
So a couple things. First of all, as I mentioned, there are a lot of requirements out there. The document that outlines the CJIS requirements from the FBI is rather lengthy. I will mention that the IJIS Institute has worked closely with the FBI and other organizations to actually publish what are some primers that help to break down that CJIS security policy. Those are available on our website. Anyone can access those for information just to help them understand better what the key components of that policy are. I think one of the areas that agencies really need to be considerate of is there is an FBI CJIS security policy, but states have their own policies and standards as well. So it's important to marry the two, to understand both. What I often see, though, is that the state policies typically encompass what is available at the federal level, and sometimes they're a little more stringent. So you do absolutely have to pay attention to both to understand what is required and the compliance that an agency needs to adhere to. The one piece of advice I would give related to security and policy is agencies need to keep in mind, at the end of the day, security is their responsibility. Even if a provider is telling them that they meet all of the requirements in the CJIS security policy or state security policies or any other state level standards or guidelines that must be adhered to, it really is the agency's responsibility to make sure that those policies are met. So it's important to make sure you're asking the right questions when you procure a solution and really digging in to ensure that that provider does meet those requirements.
Yeah, when I think about different features and functionality of any SaaS product or any solution that is put in front of you, a lot of the value propositions recently really highlight and put at the forefront AI. This is the silver bullet, right? So how does IJIS feel, either Maria or Melissa here? How do you feel about AI at large? There you go, wax poetic. Is this a useful integration? Is this something to be wary of? Is this the cure-all? How do you incorporate or kind of judiciously incorporate, if so?
So I'll jump in, and certainly Melissa can contribute as well. First of all, AI is another element or component of the public sector and of the private sector that is near and dear to the IJIS heart. Our formula, the way that we truly ensure success with our collaboration community is what we refer to as advisory committees. And we typically have advisory committees that then bring in all those different members that we talked about, public, private, fed, state, locals, and they talk about what the priorities are. Needless to say, AI was one of those subservient groups that were created as a working group. And the use of it, the need to understand the value of it, the ability to ultimately achieve what we refer to as the responsible and ethical use of AI is what dominated the conversation. As a result, and certainly as Melissa mentioned, available to anybody, forgive me, we've got those lights that go on and off if we don't have too much activity in the room.
More questions, keep those lights on.
I believe me that the bar is still open. However, that being said, is that the way that we then addressed it was with the constitution of a working group that developed first a playbook. that says in order to assess the value of AI within your agency, within your community, within your state, you need to go through these different plays. And there were 13 or 15 different plays that spoke to many, if not all, of the different components that both Melissa and Cassie and Carrie mentioned when we talked about the governance issue and the procurement issue and the policy issue. So that playbook is available. The use case scenario catalog is one where we then speak to what are the use cases that AI is not only of value, but can be done very responsibly within the current technology in order to then truly achieve what are the operational mission needs of the community. That is available. And from that came what was the constitution of a Center of Excellence on AI. And there's 3 partners that we've brought together. IJIS is one of them, the University of Ottawa, and also the Rutgers Miller Center on Policing and Community Resilience. And what is that about? That is taking that grander view that the world is a very small place and that this is not a jurisdictional issue, this is not an agency issue, this is a international issue, that we truly do need to achieve what is that ethical and responsible use of AI so that the wish list that Carrie mentioned can truly be achieved. We just need to do things very methodically, very carefully, very measured. As Cassie mentioned, don't rush it. Understand all the critical issues, be cognizant of the ups and downs, and then move forward in order to ensure success.
Great. Thank you. Carrie, I know we've kind of discussed the importance of using data to demonstrate public health and safety outcomes. What specific data points or metrics should agencies prioritize in an alcohol regulatory enforcement focused RMS?
Yeah, Kelly, in no specific order, but I guess what we're thinking, I'm gonna probably speak more from that enforcement compliance mode, but compliance in general, whether it be through inspections, also looking at compliance checks for enforcement. I mean, for public health, outlet density. I mean, looking also just at your rates in compliance and then if there's any corrective action that needs to be done, your administrative violations versus your criminal violations. Yeah, I mean, there's so many data points that we could discuss when it comes to licensing. And I mean, and when you're looking at licensing, like your license types and how many licenses you have. And there's so many data points and metrics that are so important in looking at the big picture.
Yeah. I guess if people have questions or are curious about that implementation, should they reach out to you? Who can they reach out to about that?
Yeah, certainly. They can reach out to me. I can put my email in the chat. I could be kind of that general contact. And then I can certainly, connect people with who might be, more willing and able or have that availability and what the questions are that they're looking for.
Sure, great. And it sounds like they can also learn more about this in a way at your conference coming up in a few weeks. I put a link to that in the chat. Registration's still open? You still accepting guests?
Yes, most definitely. Registration is still open up until probably the day of the conference starting November 17th. There are other vendors too that will be at the conference, so lots of conversations about RMS that people can have at the conference. So really looking forward to that and expanding everybody's knowledge in this area.
Wonderful. Great. Yeah, lots of fantastic links in this chat. I want to let this linger here so you all can click on them. A reminder that this webinar is being recorded. NLLEA will have this on their website after the fact. But I want to get to any questions. I see one here, and I feel like I'm going to get to use the attorney's question, which is any insight on what the implementation timeline might look like for a project that focuses on licensing, regulation, and education for over 1,000 licenses. And I think any attorney would say, it depends, and then bill you a lot of money. But Cassie or Melissa or Maria, any insight you want to add beyond that helpful statement from me?
Yeah, good statement, Kelly, because it really does depend on a lot of different variables, including how many integrations you have, as an example. But I would just say, an expedited process would be 12 months, and maybe a conservative response would be 18 months. Maria, Melissa, what do you say?
I would actually say that conservative, the problematic one, and unfortunately the traditional one, from what is identifying the funding all the way through the requirements, the stakeholder engagement, the development of the specifications or the request for proposal, the responses, the evaluation, the contract, sometimes takes 36 months. And those are metrics that we've used on other tools and other implementations. However, 12 months, if you are truly going for a COTS product, you're not worried about mirroring your particular process. You are willing to be flexible and to look for what are the objectives, as Cassie already mentioned. What is your goal? What is your intentions, so that then the vendors can come back with different suggestions. But then we have the default of it depends.
Yeah, and to be clear, my timeline was based on implementation specifically.
That's why I say soup to nuts. Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
right.
Great. If there are any other questions, toss them into the chat. But what I might do here for our panelists is ask them, is there anything that we haven't touched on in our webinar, or you haven't said, or really kind of that key takeaway of like, if you've heard nothing else from me, remember this. Anything that anybody wants to add in here?
I think the only thing that I would suggest is do not try to reinvent the wheel. We have mentioned, and each of our organizations have a boatload of resources that you can tap on our websites or via any contacts that you want to make. But there are even more documents and case studies and templates that you could use so that you're not starting from scratch. And yes, there will be tailoring, but tailoring is a lot easier, takes a lot less time, and takes out some of the forethought than starting from scratch. So utilize the lessons learned all around you within your jurisdictions or across the nation. They're there for you.
Great.
I think it's important, ask your peers for copies of RFPs that they've published. At the same time, make sure that you review those copies that you have and customize them to your agency. So often I've seen RFPs from an organization that have the name of another agency in the RFP. So do your due diligence, compare, and make sure that what you're looking at does meet your needs and you're publishing your requirements, not necessarily the requirements of another organization, but they provide great insights and ideas on how to structure an RFP and streamline the process.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Melissa. We've seen that too in RFPs. We're like, wait a minute, you still have the other agency's name in here. So what I would say is ask your peers about who they use and what their experience is with that vendor, because you are looking for a partner in this process, and they should have clients that are referenceable. We are proud to say that every single project we've ever done has implemented successfully. So 100% project success rate based on what we learned about IT projects. That's kind of unheard of in the industry. So we're very, very proud of that. And all our clients are referenceable. That's really important. We have no litigation going on. Also really important to ask those kind of questions, because that sometimes there is litigation based on these projects, because we're talking about typically multi-million-dollar projects. These you don't go into this kind of thing lightly as a state agency. So there's a lot on the line. So doing your due diligence about so much of what we talked about today, we wish you luck out there. So happy to answer questions or help folks down the road if you want to reach out. I put my contact information in the chat.
Great. Carrie, anything to add as a wrap up here?
Yeah, I'd just like to add, NLLEA was so grateful to work with the IJIS Institute on this. So grateful to work with NABCA on this, who helped fund this project. Also, vendors, Computronics coming forward and providing some input to the specifications report was so very helpful. So just want to thank all the key players, and And, NLLEA, my background is not RMS, so I've learned a lot. It's been wonderful working in all these different work groups. But I would say something as a takeaway is just make sure you have all your key players at the table, including enforcement, because when you are implementing these systems in the real world, and enforcement may be are going to be the ones, they always say the boots on the ground out there using the product, make sure that they can use it in the real world.
Great. Well, I don't see any more questions in the Q&A, so I will say that we have successfully delivered a fantastic webinar under budget and early. So this is a recipe for success. If others want to implement what we just did today, best of luck, and you certainly have a lot of resources to reach out to. But thank you to Carrie for putting this together, asking me to moderate. I've learned quite a bit. Thank you so much. It's been